So the ATF is now crying up to the Fifth Circuit and asking them to strike down an injunction against their frames and receivers rule. And they claim this is because Judge O'Connor is defying the Supreme Court's recent emergency order. So let's talk about this. But real quick before we jump into this video, if you think the ATF's rule on frames and receivers is clearly unconstitutional, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. Also want to give a shout out to one of the main supporters of this channel, which is Blackout Coffee. Blackout Coffee has amazing coffee and they are huge Second Amendment supporters. You can purchase some of their dedicated roasts for organizations like FBC and GOA, and some of those proceeds go directly to those organizations. So check them out using the links down below, and also if you use the code ARMSCHOLAR, you can get 10% off of your order. As I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we will be discussing how the ATF is now crying foul to the Fifth Circuit. The ATF recently suffered a big loss in the Vanderstock v. Garland frames and receivers case. Judge O'Connor in a federal district court in Texas granted a limited preliminary injunction in favor of two companies, which were Defense Distributed and then also 80% Arms. That limited injunction protects those companies and also their customers while this case is making its way through the appellate process. But the ATF is now asking for the Fifth Circuit to strike down that injunction because they claim Judge O'Connor is defying the Supreme Court and their recent 5-4 emergency stay that was issued in this case. And all of this is coming to a head this Thursday. The Fifth Circuit has ordered the parties to come before them for arguments on whether or not Judge O'Connor's order should stand in light of the Supreme Court's recent 5-4 emergency stay. The Fifth Circuit has also ordered that the ATF needs to answer two specific questions that have huge significance about this whole issue going forward and really could paint the ATF into a huge corner. Now, in this case, the original plaintiffs, FBC and Tactical Machining, sought preliminary injunctions to halt the enforcement of the ATF's new rule while this case was making its way through the process. On review, originally, Judge O'Connor granted a limited preliminary injunction against the ATF, which prevented the ATF from enforcing the rule against Tactical Machining and then also their customers. Looking at the ATF's rule on frames and receivers, Judge O'Connor found that it was facially invalid under the plain text of the statute and that Congress did not grant the ATF authority to regulate these types of items. After that, other companies like Defense Distributed and then also 80% Arms sought to intervene in the case as new named plaintiffs. They also asked the court to grant the same limited protections that was granted to Tactical Machining and also their customers. Ultimately, the court there, Judge O'Connor, did extend the protections to all these new companies. Now, after the preliminary injunction stage, FBC and the plaintiffs sought to win the entire case by asking for a motion for summary judgment. And in response, Judge O'Connor did grant a motion for summary judgment, and he vacated the frames and receivers rule in its entirety, and that was a nationwide vacatur. That was a huge win because the judge struck down the entire rule as invalid and found that the ATF should not be able to enforce it at all. Well, of course, the ATF was not going to let the summary judgment sit and the nationwide vacatur sit, so they filed an appeal up to the Fifth Circuit. Then the ATF sought a stay from the court on that whole vacatur of the frames and receivers rule. They asked the Fifth Circuit first, and the Fifth Circuit denied it. Then they decided to go up to the Supreme Court and seek emergency relief. They wanted an emergency stay of that nationwide vacatur. They did not want the rule to be vacated nationwide. That emergency application was submitted to Justice Alito, who then referred it to the full court. And in a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court agreed and stayed the enforcement of the summary judgment decision while the Fifth Circuit appeal was currently going on. The order of the Supreme Court stated that application for stay presented to Justice Alito and by him referred to the court is granted. In that same order, it was indicated that Justice Thomas, Justice Alito, Justice Gorsuch, and then also Justice Kavanaugh would have denied that application for a stay. So the indication from that is that Justice Roberts and then Justice Amy Coney Barrett joined the left to grant the ATF stay. But that order from the Supreme Court, that 5-4 order, stayed the summary judgment while the Fifth Circuit appeal is currently going on at the Fifth Circuit level. I will note that the oral arguments for that summary judgment hearing has taken place before the Fifth Circuit, and all indications are that the Fifth Circuit will actually rule in the Pro 2A side. It did not seem like they agreed at all with the ATF's arguments, and the ATF attorneys really had a hard time to try to justify this restriction, and it just seemed like the Fifth Circuit was not buying any of that. Well, after the Supreme Court issued that 5-4 emergency stay, 80% Arms and some of the other plaintiffs went back to Judge O'Connor and sought an emergency motion for a preliminary injunction. They asked for Judge O'Connor to put back in place his prior preliminary injunction that protected their company and also their customers. Essentially, they argued that the Supreme Court's emergency stay that they just issued only prevents a nationwide vacatur of the rule, but the judge can still step in and keep his prior limited injunction in place. and essentially introduce a completely different legal remedy, which is an injunction. On review, Judge O'Connor agreed and granted the injunction. Judge O'Connor in his order stated that, having considered the arguments, evidence, and applicable law, the court holds that it has ancillary jurisdiction to enforce, in equity, the portions of its summary judgment order and final judgment that remain in effect following the stay order of the Supreme Court of the United States. The court also holds that the relevant factors weigh in favor of granting injunctive relief to intervener plaintiffs. The proper scope of relief is that which mirrors the relief previously granted to intervener plaintiffs at the preliminary injunction stage, plus an extended effective period that mirrors the expiration timetable of the stay orders by the Supreme Court of the United States on August 8, 2023. So Judge O'Connor granted an emergency preliminary injunction that puts back in place the prior injunctions that he had issued to the individual companies like Defense Distributed and 80% Arms. So he's putting back in place that injunction that protects the company and their customers. Of course, the ATF could not have that type of injunction sitting, so they decided to file an appeal once again back up to the Fifth Circuit, arguing that Judge O'Connor is directly defying and trying to circumvent what the Supreme Court just issued in their emergency order. The ATF argues that Judge O'Connor cannot issue this injunction because of that emergency order. And we just received orders from the Fifth Circuit that they will be hearing arguments on this issue this upcoming Thursday. The parties are set to have oral arguments in the Fifth Circuit this Thursday on essentially whether or not Judge O'Connor's injunction is barred by what the Supreme Court said in their 5-4 emergency order. In my opinion, the ATF will lose this argument because a vacature and injunction are completely different legal remedies, and the Supreme Court's order only was specific to a nationwide vacature remedy. This did not impact something like an injunction that Judge O'Connor just re-granted. However, also interesting is the fact that the Fifth Circuit also argued that the ATF needs to answer two specific questions before this hearing. Those questions are: 1, does the United States government intend to enforce the ATF's final rule pending appeal with respect to the parties in this case? And 2, does the United States government intend to enforce the ATF's final rule pending appeal with respect to the parties' customers? And then the court states also that the government is welcome to file a response of any length to both questions, but the answers should begin yes or no. What is happening here is that the ATF is being backed into a huge corner. They will have to outright state how they intend to enforce the rule going forward. I doubt the ATF will say that they do not intend to enforce this rule, especially since all of their appeals and all of these emergency stays and requests are based on the fact that they want to be able to still enforce this rule. And so I doubt that they will say no, they don't intend to enforce it against the company and their customers. But telling the Fifth Circuit that they intend to enforce it also further solidifies what the companies and the customers are afraid of, that they need an injunction to protect themselves against these ATF actions. And really, either way, the ATF is in a huge losing situation. So you may be asking, where does this leave us? Well, the Fifth Circuit is holding oral arguments on Thursday on the frames and receivers case and on the whole issue of whether or not Judge O'Connor's injunction was proper or not because of that recent 5-4 emergency order that was issued by the Supreme Court. Also, the ATF is now required to expressly state if they intend to enforce their rule going forward against these companies and their customers. So this is going to be a very important battle going forward. This is going to be a very important argument that takes place. Likelihood is that it's going to be able to be listened to live if you want. I will link it down below when we get it. And then also I'll be over my Twitter account if you guys want to follow that. Usually I will do some live tweeting of that and you guys can follow along and I kind of give some of my main impressions. But make sure you're staying tuned because this is going to be a very dynamic situation. I'm going to try to get you guys information as it develops. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel and also make sure you hit the bell icon and click on all notifications so that you don't miss any information because, again, sometimes there's some weird YouTube stuff that goes on. But as always, if you guys like this video and you'd like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is to like, comment, and subscribe. All those things help to fuel the algorithm and it signals to YouTube that you guys see value in these videos and in this type of two-way news. As always, I want to thank everybody who likes, comments, subscribes, who hits the notification bell, who shares these videos. You guys are directly impacting these videos, impacting this channel, helping me to reach and educate more people than I could ever do on my own. So as always, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.